The escape pod hit the ground so hard that Elena Voss bit through her lip before she even opened her eyes. Smoke filled the cabin. Somewhere above her, metal groaned like it was still deciding whether to hold together. She unbuckled the harness with shaking hands and kicked the jammed hatch until it gave way, falling out into red dirt and thick, wet heat. Kesserine 4, the training map had called it a controlled environment, a place for cadets to test their limits for 2 weeks before returning to warm meals and soft beds. Nobody had mentioned the storm that would tear their transport ship apart in the upper atmosphere, or the fact that only 1 escape pod out of 4 would make it down in one piece. Elena turned in a slow circle, scanning the tree line. The forest around her was wrong, in a way she could not immediately name. The trees were too tall, black-barked, with leaves that moved even though there was no wind. Somewhere far off, something screamed, a long, rising sound that did not belong to any animal she had ever studied. Her communicator was dead, not damaged, dead. The screen cracked down the middle, its light gone out like a snuffed candle. She pressed the emergency signal anyway, over and over, until her thumb ached. But nothing answered, except the wind moving through those strange, restless leaves. She was not alone for long. A shape stumbled out of the smoke behind her, tall and broad-shouldered, with pale gray skin and eyes that reflected light like a cat's. Threll Koss, one of her squad mates, from a species that prided itself on never showing fear. Right now, fear was the only thing on his face. "The others," he said, voice tight. "Osmir's pod went down near the ridge. Vantik's signal stopped 3 minutes ago." Elena felt her stomach drop. 3 minutes ago. That was around the time she had heard the second explosion. The one she had told herself was just debris settling. "We need to move," she said. "Standing in the open is a mistake." Threll looked at her like she had grown a second head. In the academy, Elena Voss was not someone anyone listened to. She was the slowest in combat drills, the last one chosen for team exercises, the cadet whose species had only been part of the interstellar community for 2 generations. Most of her classmates came from worlds that had been fighting wars among the stars, since before humans had learned to build wheels. They called Earth a cradle world, soft and safe, a planet where nothing had ever truly hunted its people. But right now, Threll had no better idea, so he followed her toward the tree line. They found Osmir first. He had made it out of his pod, but not much further. A deep gash ran along his side, and his breathing came in short, ragged pulls. Whatever had caught him was gone by the time they arrived, leaving only broken branches and a smell like burned copper in the air. "We have to carry him," Elena said, already crouching to take his weight. "He is too heavy," Threll said, "and we do not know what did this. Then we better find out before it comes back." They moved through the forest as fast as they could, Osmir slung between them, his boots dragging twin lines through the red dirt. Elena's arms burned, her lungs ached, and every few seconds her mind screamed at her to just run and leave the weight behind. She did not listen to it. They reached a rocky outcrop as the light began to fade, the sky turning a deep, bruised purple that Elena had never seen on any world before. Threll set Osmir down against the stone, checking his wound with hands that trembled slightly. "He needs a medical unit," Threll said. "We do not have one." "Then we keep him stable until help comes," Elena said. "Help?" Threll laughed, a short, humorless sound. "Our beacon is destroyed. Command thinks this was a routine exercise. Nobody is coming tonight." Elena did not answer, because she knew he was right, and there was nothing useful to say about it. Instead, she started gathering fallen branches, snapping them into rough lengths, building the beginning of a shelter against the rock face. It was something to do with her hands. It kept the panic from swallowing her whole. Night on Kesserine 4 did not fall quietly. As the last light disappeared, the forest came alive with sound, distant calls that echoed and answered each other, closer rustlings that made every hair on Elena's arms stand up. She kept the small fire low, remembering somewhere in the back of her mind that bright light and loud noise called attention on dangerous worlds. It was a strange thing to know, an old human instinct passed down from ancestors who had once slept in caves, while creatures far larger than them moved through the dark outside. Threll did not sleep. He sat with his back against the rock, staring out into the black tree line, weapon across his knees. Elena understood, in a distant way, that his species had no such instincts to draw on. Their homeworld had been tamed centuries before they ever left it. To him, this darkness was simply empty and unknowable. To Elena, it felt disturbingly familiar, like a memory she had never actually lived, but somehow still carried. Sometime near midnight, Osmir's breathing changed. Elena woke instantly, some old part of her brain flagging the shift in sound before her conscious mind caught up. She crawled to his side and pressed 2 fingers to his neck. His pulse was there, but thin, uneven, slipping. "Threll," she said quietly, "come here." He came, and together they did what little they could, elevating his legs, keeping pressure on the wound, talking to him in low, steady voices, even when his eyes stopped opening. It did not matter, in the end. Somewhere before the first gray light touched the sky, Osmir's breathing simply stopped, and no amount of pressing or talking brought it back. Threll made a sound Elena had never heard from him before, something between a growl and a cry, and then went silent, sitting very still with his hand resting on Osmir's shoulder. Elena sat back on her heels and looked up at the strange purple sky beginning to lighten, and felt something inside her go very cold and very quiet. They buried him as best they could, piling stones over a shallow trench dug with bare hands and a broken piece of the pod's hull. Neither of them spoke much while they worked. When it was done, Threll stood over the small mound for a long moment before turning away. "We find Vantik," he said. "Then we find a way off this planet." Elena nodded, though some part of her already suspected what they would find. They found Vantik's pod by midday, crushed against a boulder as if something enormous had thrown it there. There was no sign of their third squad mate, only scattered supplies and a long furrow of disturbed earth leading away into the trees, the kind of trail Elena's ancestors would have recognized instantly. Something had taken him, something had dragged him away. Threll wanted to follow the trail. Elena grabbed his arm before he could take more than a few steps. "No," she said. "Whatever did this is bigger than both of us combined. Following it means dying the same way he did." "So we just leave him?" "We survive," Elena said, more firmly than she felt. "That is what he would want. Dying to prove a point helps nobody." Threll stared at her for a long moment, jaw tight, and then, to her surprise, he nodded and stepped back from the trail. They spent the rest of that day gathering what supplies remained, salvaging what they could from both broken pods. A single working water filter, a medical kit stripped of anything actually useful, 2 energy blades with half their charge gone. Not much to survive on a planet that had already claimed 2 of their squad mates in under a day. That night, they made camp on higher ground, a rocky shelf that gave them a clear view in every direction. Elena sat with her back against stone, watching the tree line, the way she imagined a hunter would, patient, still, waiting for the smallest sign of movement. It was strange how naturally the posture came to her, how her body seemed to know what to do, even when her mind had never been taught it. "You are different out here," Threll said eventually, breaking the long silence between them. "Different how? In the academy, you struggled. Here, you move like you already know this place." He tilted his head, studying her with the same curious, calculating look she had seen on the sensors used to analyze unknown life forms. "It is strange." Elena considered the question for a long moment before answering. "My planet spent most of its history full of things that wanted to eat us," she said. "Big cats, wolves, things bigger than both. We learned to read tracks, to notice when the birds went quiet, to know when something was watching us before we ever saw it. Your world stopped needing that a long time ago. Mine did not. Not really. Not deep down." Threll said nothing for a while, only stared at her with an expression she could not fully read. Then he turned back to face the darkness, weapon resting across his knees. "I hope those instincts are enough," he said quietly, "because something out there is still watching us." Elena did not answer, but she felt it too, a low, prickling awareness at the base of her skull, the same feeling her ancestors must have had 100,000 years earlier, while sitting outside a cave, staring into a darkness that stared back. Somewhere beyond the tree line, a low growl rolled through the night air, deep enough that Elena felt it in her chest before she consciously registered the sound. It was not close, not yet, but it was there, patient, unhurried, the way something moved when it already knew where its prey was, and had all the time in the world to wait. Elena closed her hand around the hilt of her energy blade and did not sleep again that night. By the third day, hunger had become a steady, gnawing presence, and the forest had taught them both the same lesson in different ways. Threll had learned to fear it. Elena had begun, slowly, cautiously, to understand it. She started noticing patterns in the sounds around them, the way certain calls repeated at the same times each morning, the way smaller creatures went silent minutes before anything larger moved through the undergrowth. She began reading the broken branches and disturbed dirt the way she might once have read a book, piecing together a rough picture of what moved where, and when, and why. "You are tracking something," Threll said, watching her crouch beside a set of massive prints pressed deep into the mud. "I am trying to understand something," Elena corrected. "There is a difference. Right now, I only want to know where it is not, so we can avoid it." The prints were larger than anything she had ever studied back home. 3 long claw marks stretching ahead of a wide, heavy pad, sunk deep enough into the ground to suggest real weight behind each step. Whatever made them had passed through recently, the edges of the prints still sharp and unweathered by wind. That evening, as the light began to fade again, Elena finally allowed herself to say the thought that had been building in her mind since the moment Osmir's breathing had stopped. "We are not getting rescued soon," she said. "Maybe not for weeks. Maybe longer." Threll's shoulders sagged slightly, but he did not argue. He had clearly reached the same conclusion on his own, simply unwilling to say it aloud first. "Then what do we do?" he asked. Elena looked out at the darkening tree line, at the world that had already taken 2 of her squad mates and seemed entirely willing to take more. Somewhere out there, something enormous was moving through the shadows, patient and confident, in a way that suggested it had never once lost to anything that lived here. "We learn faster than it does," she said quietly, "or we do not make it home." The growl came again in the distance, closer than before, and neither of them slept much that night. But for the first time since the crash, Elena did not feel entirely helpless against the darkness pressing in around their small fire. Something old and quiet inside her had woken up on this planet, something that had been sleeping since long before humans had ever left their homeworld, and it was not ready to let this place win. By the end of the first week, Elena had stopped counting the days by numbers and started counting them by what she had survived. The rains came on day 9, sheets of warm water pouring down through the black canopy for hours without pause, turning the ground into thick red mud that sucked at their boots with every step. Threll wanted to keep moving, convinced that staying in one place too long was an invitation for whatever hunted them to close in. Elena disagreed, and for the first time since the crash, she pushed back hard enough that he actually stopped and listened. "Movement leaves a trail," she said, crouching under the wide leaves of a fallen tree for shelter. "Standing still in a place we understand is safer than running blind into a place we do not." "You keep saying safer," Threll said, water streaming down his pale face. "Nothing here is safe." "Safer," Elena repeated. "Not safe." "There is a difference, and right now, that difference is the only thing keeping us alive." He did not argue further, mostly because he was too exhausted to, and they spent the worst of the storm huddled beneath the fallen tree, listening to the forest scream and groan around them. Elena used the time to study, running her fingers along the tree's exposed roots, noting how deep they ran, how the plant had clearly weathered storms like this many times before. Everything on this planet had adapted to survive. She intended to do the same. When the rain finally stopped, the forest smelled different, sharper, and the ground was littered with things the storm had shaken loose. Elena found a cluster of pale fruit hanging low on a nearby vine, and stopped Threll before he could reach for one. "Wait," she said. "We do not know if that is safe to eat. We are starving. We will be more starving if we are also sick." She picked one of the fruits carefully, turning it over in her hands, checking the skin for any sign of insects feeding on it. "If the small things eat it and survive, it is probably safe for us too. If nothing touches it, that usually means something." She was right more often than she was wrong, and slowly, through trial and careful observation, they built a mental map of what the forest offered. Certain roots that could be boiled into something almost like broth. Fruit that gave quick energy but had to be eaten in small amounts. Water that ran clear over stone was safer than water that pooled still and dark beneath the trees. It was on day 12 that Elena first saw one of the predators up close, and lived to remember every detail of it. She had gone alone to check a snare she had built from salvaged wire. A simple design she remembered from an old survival manual back at the academy, one most of her classmates had mocked as outdated and unnecessary in an age of advanced technology. The trap had caught something, a mid-sized creature, with thick fur and too many legs, thrashing weakly against the wire when Elena arrived. She never got the chance to free it. The creature that came out of the tree line moved with a silence that should have been impossible for something so large. It stood taller than any human, taller even than Threll, its body covered in overlapping plates of dark, chitinous armor that caught what little light filtered through the canopy. Its head was long and narrow, built low and forward like something designed purely for tracking, and its eyes, when they found Elena standing frozen 20 feet away, held an intelligence that chilled her far more than any simple animal hunger would have. It looked at her the way she imagined a predator might look at prey it had already decided was not worth the effort. Then it turned, almost lazily, took the small creature from her snare in a single fast movement, and disappeared back into the trees without ever making another sound. Elena did not move for a full minute after it was gone. When she finally returned to camp, her hands were shaking so badly that Threll noticed immediately. "What happened?" "I saw it," she said. "The thing that has been tracking us." She described it as best she could, the armored plates, the low narrow head, the way it moved without sound despite its obvious size. Threll's face went pale as she spoke. "Skarn," he said quietly. "I have heard of them. Old reports, mostly dismissed as exaggeration. Apex predators found on a handful of unclassified worlds, supposedly intelligent enough to plan, to learn, to remember." "It looked right at me," Elena said. "It could have attacked. It chose not to. Maybe it was not hungry." "Or maybe," Elena said slowly, working through the thought as she spoke it, "it was deciding whether I was worth the trouble. Testing me, learning what I am before it commits to anything." The idea settled uncomfortably between them, and neither spoke again for a while. That night, Elena did something she had not done since the crash. She dug through the wreckage of Osmir's shattered pod, searching until she found a small data slate still clinging to a fraction of power. It held basic species records, general information every cadet was issued before deployment. She scrolled through entries on Kesserine 4's classification, most of it frustratingly vague, until she found a single line buried near the bottom of an old survey report. Local apex predator behavior suggests advanced pack coordination and long-term memory retention. Extreme caution advised. Do not underestimate. She read it twice, then looked out at the dark tree line, where, somewhere, that same creature was likely watching them right now, patient and thoughtful, in a way nothing should have been. "It remembers me," she said quietly. Threll looked over, unsettled. "What?" "It saw me today. It will remember my scent, my movement, the way I react. Next time it comes, it will already know things about me that I do not know about it." She turned the thought over slowly. "Unless I start learning just as fast." From that point on, Elena changed the way she moved through the forest. She stopped following the same paths twice. She varied the times she gathered water, the places she checked her snares, the patterns of her footsteps through soft ground. She began deliberately leaving false trails, doubling back, crossing her own tracks the way old hunting manuals from Earth had described animals doing to confuse pursuers. She was no longer simply surviving. She was studying, adapting, thinking several steps ahead of something that had spent its entire existence being the smartest thing in this forest. Threll watched all of this with a mixture of confusion and growing respect. "In the academy," he said one evening, "you were ranked lowest in tactical thinking. I remember the instructors saying it plainly." "Maybe tactical thinking there meant something different than it does here," Elena said. "Back there, it meant memorizing formations and following orders quickly. Out here, it means noticing everything, trusting instincts I did not even know I had, and never assuming I already understand something completely." She looked over at him. "I am not smarter than that creature. I am just paying closer attention than it expects me to." 2 days later, the Skarn returned. And this time, it was not alone. Elena spotted the second one first, a slightly smaller shape, moving parallel to the first through the trees, clearly coordinating, clearly hunting together. She froze mid-step, every instinct screaming at her to run, and forced herself instead to think. Running triggered chase. Chase favored the faster animal, and nothing on this planet was faster than a Skarn. Standing still, showing no fear, no obvious weakness, that was the only option left that gave her any chance at all. "Do not run," she said quietly to Threll, who had gone rigid beside her. "Whatever happens, do not run." The two predators emerged from the tree line slowly, deliberately, spreading apart as they approached, in a way that left no doubt they were working together. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs, but she forced her breathing to stay slow, forced her body to stay still, remembering something her grandmother had once told her about the old predators that used to roam parts of Earth long before cities replaced forests. They read fear in movement, in breath, in the way prey held itself. Stillness confused them. Stillness suggested something dangerous, something not worth the risk. The larger Skarn stopped 10 feet away, head tilted, studying her with the same unsettling intelligence she remembered from before. Elena held its gaze and did not look away, did not step back, did not give it the reaction it seemed to be waiting for. For a long, terrible moment, nothing happened at all. Then, without warning, both creatures turned and melted back into the trees as silently as they had appeared, leaving Elena and Threll standing alone in the sudden quiet, hearts pounding, alive. "How?" Threll breathed. "Did you know that would work?" "I did not," Elena admitted, her legs finally beginning to shake now that the danger had passed. I guessed based on something my species learned a very long time ago, from animals that no longer exist where I come from." She looked out at the trees where the predators had vanished. "But I think I just learned something important. They are testing us. Every encounter, they are testing us, deciding what we are, deciding if we are worth the risk of hunting properly." "Then what do we do next time?" Elena thought about it for a long moment, watching the shifting shadows between the trees, feeling something shift and settle inside her own mind at the same time. "Next time," she said, "we stop being the ones who get tested. We start testing them back." Over the following days, Elena began, carefully and deliberately, to reverse the dynamic that had defined their survival so far. She studied the places the Skarn favored, the times they moved, the subtle signs, broken branches, disturbed dirt, a particular bird call that fell silent moments before they appeared, that marked their presence before she could see them directly. She built simple early warning markers from salvaged wire and loose stones, small signals that would alert her and Threll long before any predator got close enough to matter. She also began, slowly, to understand something the Academy instructors had never once mentioned in any lecture. The Skarn were dangerous because nothing on this world had ever successfully challenged them. They hunted with total confidence, because confidence had never once failed them. That confidence, Elena realized, was also a weakness, because it meant they had never needed to consider what to do when prey stopped behaving like prey. She intended to make sure they learned that lesson properly, whether they wanted to or not. Threll, for his part, stopped questioning her methods and started following her lead entirely. The cadet who had once been ranked lowest among her peers had become, without either of them fully realizing when it happened, the one keeping them both alive. "I used to think humans were fortunate," Threll admitted one quiet evening, watching Elena carefully reset one of her early warning markers along their perimeter. "A soft world, an easy history, nothing forcing your species to grow sharp edges, the way the rest of us had to." Elena paused, considering the strange dirt marker in her hands, thinking of every old story her grandmother had told her as a child, stories of ancient hunters and older predators, of a species that had clawed its way to the top of its own world through nothing but stubbornness and pattern and memory. "We were never as soft as everyone assumed," she said quietly. "We just forgot, for a while, that we used to be something else." Somewhere in the darkening trees beyond their camp, a low call rose and was answered. Distant, but unmistakable, two predators coordinating once again. Elena listened to it without fear this time, only calculation, already turning over the beginnings of a plan in her mind, one that would, in the weeks to come, change everything about how this planet, and eventually the wider galaxy, understood exactly what a human being was truly capable of becoming when given no other choice. 3 weeks into their time on Kesserine 4, Elena Voss stopped thinking of herself as stranded and started thinking of herself as something closer to a resident. The forest no longer felt like an enemy waiting to swallow her whole. It felt, instead, like a puzzle she was slowly learning to solve, piece by piece, day by day. She had mapped the safest paths to water. She had identified 3 separate types of edible plant life and learned to avoid 2 more that had made both her and Threll violently ill during their first careless week. She had built a proper shelter, low and hidden beneath an overhang of stone, its entrance disguised with cut branches, far sturdier than the makeshift camp they had first thrown together in panic. What she had not expected was how much the forest itself seemed to be watching her adapt. The Skarn returned more often now, though never quite close enough to attack, always circling at a careful distance, observing from the shadows the way Elena imagined a rival studying an opponent before a real confrontation. She began to recognize them individually, small differences in their armor plating, a scar along one's foreleg, a slightly different gait in another. There were at least 4 in the immediate area, possibly part of a larger group, whose full numbers she could only guess at. "They are not hunting us the normal way anymore," she told Threll one evening, sitting near their small, carefully hidden fire. "Normal prey runs, panics, makes mistakes. We stopped doing that weeks ago. Now I think they are trying to understand what we actually are. Does that make us safer, or more interesting to them?" Threll asked. Elena did not have a good answer for that, and the honest uncertainty sat uneasily between them for the rest of the night. It was around this time that Elena began noticing something else, something that unsettled her far more than the predators circling their camp. Small structures, deliberately built rather than naturally formed, scattered here and there through the deeper parts of the forest. Piles of stone arranged with clear intention. Bones, old and weathered, positioned in patterns that could not possibly be accidental. She found the first one while tracking a water source nearly a mile from their camp, a low cairn of flat stones stacked with obvious care, ringed by a scattering of bones far larger than anything from the small creatures they had been eating. Elena crouched beside it for a long time, studying the arrangement, an old and quiet unease building steadily in her chest. "This was not made by an animal," she said when she brought Threll back to see it. "Animals do not build monuments." "Then what did?" Elena did not answer immediately, her mind working through possibilities she did not particularly want to consider. She thought of the intelligence she had seen in the Skarn's eyes during their first encounter, the clear calculation behind every movement, the coordination between multiple individuals that went far beyond simple pack instinct. "I think," she said slowly, "we may have assumed something about this planet that was wrong from the very beginning." Over the following days, they found 3 more similar structures, each slightly different, each clearly deliberate. Elena began to suspect that the Skarn were not simply intelligent predators acting on instinct, but something closer to a true society, one that marked territory, and perhaps even memory, in ways far more sophisticated than the Academy's outdated survey reports had ever suggested. This realization changed everything about how she approached their survival. If the Skarn were capable of complex thought, complex memory, perhaps even complex communication between individuals, then simple avoidance strategies were not going to be enough to keep her and Threll safe indefinitely. Sooner or later, patience alone would run out, either because rescue never came, or because the predators finally decided that continued observation was not worth continued restraint. Elena made a decision that, had she made it back at the Academy, would have gotten her failing marks from every single instructor who had ever taught her. She decided to stop avoiding the Skarn entirely, and instead, to deliberately seek out limited, controlled contact with them, on her own terms, at times and places she chose. Threll thought she had lost her mind. "You want to walk toward the things that killed Osmir and took Vantik," he said, disbelief plain in his voice. "On purpose." "I want to understand them," Elena corrected. "Right now we are reacting to whatever they decide to do. I would rather know what they are capable of before that knowledge costs us everything." She began small, leaving portions of gathered food at a careful distance from camp, watching from cover to see how the predators responded. At first, nothing touched the offerings. Then, slowly, cautiously, one of the smaller skarn began approaching the food when it believed itself unobserved, eating quickly, before retreating back into the tree line. Elena adjusted her approach, moving the food slightly closer to her position each time, always maintaining distance, always making sure she had an escape route, always making sure she had an escape route, always watching for any sign of aggression that would mean she had misjudged the situation badly. Threll refused to participate directly, but he stood guard from a distance each time, weapon ready, clearly convinced this experiment would eventually get one or both of them killed. It did not happen quickly. Weeks passed, marked by small, incremental changes in behavior that Elena tracked with the same careful attention she had once given to reading tracks and predicting weather patterns. The smaller skarn, the one she had begun quietly thinking of as the scout, given how frequently it appeared alone ahead of the others, began tolerating her presence at steadily closer distances. It never approached her directly. It never showed anything resembling friendliness. But it also never attacked, even when opportunities to do so were plainly available. "It is learning that I am not prey," Elena explained to Threll one evening, "the same way I am learning that it is not simply a mindless killer. We are teaching each other, slowly, what the other one actually is." "That is either the wisest thing I have ever heard," Threll said, "or the most foolish. I have not yet decided which." The true test of everything Elena had learned came on what she later calculated to be day 41, though by that point, exact counting had become somewhat difficult given how thoroughly her days had reshaped themselves around the rhythms of the forest rather than any academy calendar. She and Threll had ventured further from camp than usual, searching for a mineral deposit Elena believed could be refined into something useful for repairing their damaged communicator, still non-functional despite weeks of intermittent effort. The deposit sat near the base of a rocky ridge, a location that, Elena realized too late, sat almost directly at the boundary between what she had come to understand as two separate skarn territories. The confrontation, when it came, was sudden and violent in a way their earlier encounters had never been. A massive skarn, larger than any Elena had previously seen, easily twice the size of the scout she had spent weeks slowly earning tolerance from, emerged from the ridge with none of the cautious circling she had grown accustomed to. This one moved with clear, immediate intent, and Elena understood instantly, with the same sharp clarity that had kept her alive this long, that this was not a creature interested in testing or observing. This was a creature that had already decided they were a threat worth eliminating. "Move," she shouted, shoving Threll toward the cover of a nearby rock formation, as the massive predator closed the distance between them far faster than something its size had any right to move. What followed was not a fight so much as a desperate, chaotic scramble for survival. Elena's energy blade, its charge weakened after weeks without proper power, managed only a single solid strike against the creature's armored hide before the weapon failed entirely, sparking uselessly in her hand. She threw herself sideways, feeling the rush of displaced air, as a massive limb swept through the space she had occupied a heartbeat earlier, close enough that she felt the impact tremor through the ground beneath her. Threll, to his credit, did not run. He drew the second energy blade and moved to draw the creature's attention away from Elena, shouting and striking at its flank, buying her the few precious seconds she needed to scramble toward higher ground where the predator's greater bulk would be less of an advantage. It was, strangely, the smaller skarn, the scout Elena had spent weeks cultivating a careful, wordless understanding with, that changed the outcome of the confrontation entirely. It emerged from the tree line at the exact moment the larger predator turned its attention fully toward Threll, moving between them with a speed and directness Elena had never seen it display before. What followed was brief and confusing, a blur of armored bodies and low, guttural sounds that Elena would later understand, upon reflection, as some form of territorial challenge, one predator asserting a claim over ground, or perhaps over prey, that another had trespassed against. The larger skarn broke off its attack, retreating with obvious reluctance back toward the ridge, clearly unwilling to escalate the confrontation further against an unexpected rival. The scout remained a moment longer, its strange reflective eyes finding Elena's across the clearing, before it too withdrew into the trees, leaving both cadets alive, shaken, but very much intact. It saved us, Threll said, staring at the empty tree line in stunned disbelief. That thing saved us. I do not think it saved us out of any concern for our well-being, Elena said carefully, still catching her breath, her hands trembling with the aftermath of adrenaline. I think it saved territory it had already decided was its own to protect. We simply happened to be standing inside that territory when it made that decision. Does the reason matter? We are alive. Elena considered the question seriously as they made their way back toward camp, slower now, both of them favoring various small injuries collected during the chaos. Maybe not, she admitted eventually, but understanding the reason is the only thing that will let us survive the next time something like this happens. Luck runs out eventually, understanding does not. That night, Elena sat awake long after Threll had finally succumbed to exhausted sleep, turning over everything she had learned since the crash. She thought of Osmir, buried beneath careful stones on the far side of the ridge. She thought of Vantik, whose fate she still did not know for certain, though she had long since accepted the likely truth of it. She thought of the person she had been at the academy, ranked lowest, dismissed, considered soft and unremarkable by classmates who had never once questioned their own assumptions about what humanity truly was. That person, she realized, staring out at the dark tree line where somewhere, a scarred and watchful predator moved silently through territory it had claimed, and perhaps in some strange way had begun to share, no longer existed. Something else had grown in that person's place over the past 6 weeks, something older and sharper than anything the Academy's training programs had ever managed to instill in her. She did not yet know what that meant for her future, whether rescue would ever actually come, whether she would live to explain any of this to anyone beyond the forest itself. But she knew, with a certainty that settled deep and unshakable in her chest, that whatever happened next, she would not face it as the same cadet who had crashed onto this planet 6 weeks earlier. Kesserine 4 had tried to break her. Instead, it had shown her something about herself, and about her entire species, that neither she nor anyone else had fully understood before now. Somewhere far above the black canopy, hidden by distance and storm, and the vast uncaring silence of space, a very different kind of change was beginning to take shape. Ancient systems, dormant for longer than most species currently active among the stars had existed, stirred quietly to life in response to patterns of survival that matched criteria written into their code long before anyone alive today had been born. A classification, rarely triggered, almost never confirmed, began slowly working its way through layers of automated verification, flagging a world, and a species, for review at the very highest levels of interstellar authority. Neither Elena nor Threll had any way of knowing it yet, but far beyond the reach of their small, hidden camp, the Deathworlder protocol had just begun to stir. Commander Grant Ashby had not expected to spend his Tuesday morning staring at a report that made no logical sense. The message had come through an automated system rarely triggered outside of training simulations, a flagged classification labeled simply as Protocol Review, Priority 1. Ashby had been running the Academy's cadet survival programs for 11 years, and in that entire time, he had seen this particular alert activate exactly twice, both times involving species whose entire evolutionary history had been shaped by extreme environmental pressure. Neither time had it involved a species from what the wider interstellar community still quietly referred to as a cradle world. He read the flagged file twice before calling Lieutenant Mara Ellison into his office. "Explain this to me," he said, sliding the display toward her. "Because either our systems have made an error, or something happened on Kesserine 4 that none of us anticipated." Ellison scanned the report, her expression shifting from mild curiosity to something closer to disbelief as she read further. "This is pulling data from the automated survey drones we deployed after the storm," she said. "Long-range monitoring only. Nothing close enough to interfere with survivors. Standard protocol for a site presumed lost." She looked up. "It says here that drone footage confirms 2 living cadets, active and mobile, 6 weeks after the crash. Kesserine 4 has a 100% fatality rate for anyone stranded longer than 4 days, Ashby said. "That is not an estimate. That is confirmed historical data going back over a decade." "I am aware, sir." "Then explain to me how 2 cadets, one of them from a species with no prior Deathworld survival record at all, have apparently been alive and functioning on that planet for 6 weeks. Ellison did not have an answer, and neither, for the moment, did anyone else on the Academy's senior staff. What they did have, however, was drone footage, grainy and distant, but undeniably real, showing two figures moving through the forest with clear purpose and coordination. One of them, unmistakably, was human. The footage showed something else, too, something that made several senior officers in the review room go very quiet when it first played across the main display. A moment of contact between the smaller of the two figures and one of the planet's apex predators. Not a chase, not an attack, but something that looked disturbingly close to mutual recognition. "That is not possible," said Council Representative Vex Solandri, a tall, silver-scaled member of the review committee whose species had catalogued Kesserine 4's ecosystem decades earlier and marked it permanently unsurvivable. "The Skarn do not tolerate proximity from any species. Our own survey teams lost personnel simply from aerial observation too close to their territory." "And yet," Ashby said, gesturing toward the frozen frame on the display, "here we are." The decision to authorize an extraction mission was not made lightly, nor was it made quickly. Kesserine Ivor's official designation as unsurvivable meant any rescue attempt required approval from multiple layers of Academy and Council authority, each demanding additional verification before committing resources to a planet that had, until 6 weeks ago, seemed like nothing more than an unfortunate grave for two lost cadets. It was Ellison, ultimately, who pushed the decision through, presenting the drone footage alongside a blunt assessment that cut through the layers of bureaucratic hesitation. "We have confirmed survivors," she told the review committee. "Whatever questions we have about how or why this happened can be answered once they are safely returned. Every day we delay is another day we risk losing them, for reasons that have nothing to do with the planet itself." The extraction team, led by veteran salvage pilot Dana Whitlock, launched 3 days later, equipped with heavier defensive systems than any previous mission to the planet had carried, given the uncertainty surrounding exactly what condition and what mindset the surviving cadets might be found in. What Whitlock's team found, when their shuttle finally set down in a cleared section of forest near the coordinates the drone footage had identified, was not the desperate, broken survivors many on the Academy staff had quietly expected. Elena Voss walked out of the tree line under her own power, lean and weathered in a way that spoke to weeks of hardship, but steady on her feet, alert, clearly in control of the situation in a manner that unsettled several members of the extraction team more than outright panic would have. Threll Koss walked beside her, similarly changed, the nervous, uncertain cadet from the Academy replaced by someone far more measured and watchful. "Cadet Voss," Whitlock said carefully, stepping down from the shuttle's ramp. "We were not entirely certain what we would find out here." "Neither was I, 6 weeks ago," Elena said. Her voice was steady, though quieter than Whitlock remembered from her Academy file, the voice of someone who had spent a very long time listening more than speaking. "There is something you need to know before we board. We are not the only survivors this planet claimed, but we are also not leaving certain things behind." She gestured, and 2 other figures emerged from the tree line behind her, carrying between them a heavy, awkward burden wrapped in salvaged fabric. Whitlock's team moved to help, and when the fabric shifted during the transfer, several members of the extraction crew went very still at what it revealed. 2 massive skulls, unmistakably predatory, armored plating still attached in places, jaws lined with rows of teeth built for tearing through far more than simple vegetation. "Skarn," Whitlock breathed, staring at the remains. "Full-grown Skarn skulls. Cadet, do you understand what these are?" "I understand exactly what they are," Elena said. "I have spent 6 weeks learning everything about them that this planet was willing to teach me. These 2 attacked our position directly, with clear intent to eliminate us as a threat. We did not go looking for a confrontation. When it came anyway, we made sure we were the ones who survived it." The shuttle ride back to the Academy's orbital station passed mostly in silence, Elena and Threll both quietly absorbing the strange, disorienting sensation of returning to clean air, artificial light, and gravity that did not shift unpredictably beneath uneven, dangerous ground. Whitlock, watching them both from across the cabin, found herself unable to look away from the 2 massive skulls secured carefully in the shuttle's cargo hold. "Command is going to have a great many questions," she said eventually. I have a great many answers, Elena replied. Whether they are ready to hear them is a different matter entirely. When the shuttle finally docked at the Academy's main station, Elena stepped out into a reception area, far more crowded than she had expected. Senior officers and council representatives gathered in numbers that suggested her return had become considerably more significant than a routine rescue debrief. Commander Ashby stood near the front of the assembled group, his expression carefully neutral in the way she remembered from every Academy lecture he had ever delivered. Cadet Voss, he said, welcome back. Commander, Elena replied, offering the expected formal acknowledgement, even as her eyes swept the room, cataloging exits and gathering crowds, with the same instinctive awareness that had kept her alive on Kesserine 4. Old habits, it seemed, did not simply disappear the moment danger technically ended. There is a great deal to discuss, Ashby continued. Your survival alone would warrant significant review. The manner of your survival, however, has triggered something considerably more complicated. The Deathworlder protocol, Elena said, and watched genuine surprise flicker across the commander's face. You know of it? Threll explained what little he understood on our return flight, Elena said. I would like to know the rest, Commander, before this becomes any more complicated than it already is. Ashby studied her for a long moment, something shifting behind his carefully composed expression, an acknowledgement, perhaps, that the cadet standing before him bore only a passing resemblance to the uncertain, underestimated student who had left for a routine training exercise 6 weeks earlier. Very well, he said finally. Walk with me, Cadet. I believe this conversation is long overdue. They walked together through the station's quiet corridors, past windows that showed the vast darkness of space, stretching endlessly beyond the reinforced glass. Elena listening carefully, as Ashby began, for the first time, to explain exactly what her survival had set into motion, and exactly how much the wider galaxy's understanding of her species was about to change because of it. The briefing room was colder than Elena remembered any Academy space being, though she suspected the chill had less to do with actual temperature and more to do with the sheer number of unfamiliar faces gathered around the long central table, each one studying her with an intensity that felt uncomfortably similar to the way the Skarn had once studied her from across a forest clearing. Commander Ashby sat at the head of the table, with Council Representative Vex Solandri seated to his right, silver scales catching the room's harsh overhead lighting. Lieutenant Ellison occupied a seat near the far end, along with several others whose titles Elena did not fully recognize, delegates from species whose homeworlds she had only ever studied in distant academic terms. Let us begin with the basics, Solandri said, his voice carrying the careful, measured tone of someone accustomed to controlling difficult conversations. Cadet Voss, you understand that Kesserine 4 carries an official designation of unsurvivable. That designation exists based on decades of consistent, verified data. I am aware, Elena said. And yet you survived there for 6 weeks, alongside Cadet Kass, ultimately eliminating 2 adult Skarn in direct confrontation. Solandri gestured toward a display screen, showing detailed scans of the 2 skulls Elena had brought back with her, now secured for study in the Academy's research facility. I would like you to walk this committee through exactly how that became possible. Elena had expected this question, had turned over how to answer it during the long, quiet hours of the shuttle flight home. She chose, in the end, to simply tell the truth, without embellishment, without apology. I stopped assuming I understood the danger and started actually studying it, she said. My species spent most of its history sharing our world with predators, far more dangerous than anything modern life prepared us to expect. We forgot that history for a while, once cities and technology made it feel unnecessary. Kesserine 4 reminded me of things I did not even know I still carried, patterns for reading tracks, recognizing danger before it announces itself, understanding that stillness sometimes protects better than speed. You are suggesting instinct alone allowed you to survive an environment that has killed every previous recorded visitor, Solandri said, skepticism plain in his tone. I am suggesting instinct gave me a starting point, Elena corrected. Everything after that was careful observation, patience, and a willingness to be wrong and adjust quickly when I was. The Skarn are intelligent, counselor. They test before they commit to a confrontation. I learned that early, and I used it, the same way they were using their own understanding of us. A murmur moved through the assembled representatives, and Elena caught fragments of translated reactions in several languages she only partially understood. Ashby raised a hand, calling the room back to order. Cadet Koss has already provided a separate account that corroborates Cadet Voss's description of events, he said. Additionally, biological analysis of the recovered Skarn remains confirms both were killed through direct physical confrontation, consistent with the survivor's testimony. There is no indication of fabrication here. What we are dealing with is a confirmed, verified anomaly. An anomaly with significant implications, Solandri said quietly, and for the first time since the briefing began, Elena heard something beneath his careful, measured tone that sounded almost like genuine unease. The discussion that followed stretched on for nearly 2 hours, covering ground Elena had not fully anticipated when she first sat down at that long table. Detailed questions about her survival methods, about the structures she had discovered deep in the forest, about the strange, cautious relationship she had built with the scout Skarn that had ultimately intervened during the confrontation that claimed the 2 skulls now sitting in the Academy's research facility. It was Lieutenant Ellison who finally raised the question that seemed to hang over the entire room, unspoken until that point. "What does this mean for humanity's official classification?" she asked. "We currently list Earth origin species under a general threat assessment, several tiers below most Council member worlds. Given what Cadet Voss has demonstrated, is that classification still accurate?" Solandri was quiet for a long moment before answering, his silver eyes fixed on the display still showing detailed scans of the recovered skulls. "The Deathworlder protocol exists precisely for situations like this," he said finally. "It flags any species capable of thriving, not merely surviving, but genuinely thriving, in an environment officially designated as beyond survival. Until this incident, no Earth origin individual had ever triggered that classification." He paused. "That has now changed, and it cannot simply be ignored or dismissed as an isolated event." "So what happens now?" Elena asked, speaking directly into the tension that had settled over the room. "Now," Ashby said, "your entire species undergoes formal reassessment. Every historical record, every previous survival account, every piece of data the Academy has ever collected on humanity gets reviewed through an entirely new lens. What you did on Kesserine 4 was not simply impressive, Cadet Voss. It was unprecedented, and unprecedented events tend to change how the wider galaxy views everyone connected to them." The days that followed passed in a strange, disorienting blur for Elena, filled with additional interviews, medical evaluations, and repeated requests to walk various specialists through her experiences on Kesserine 4 in ever greater detail. She found herself, more than once, missing the simple clarity of the forest, where every decision had immediate, tangible consequences, where survival depended on careful observation rather than navigating layers of political and academic scrutiny. Threll, going through much of the same process separately, found her one evening in the Academy's observation deck, both of them drawn to the quiet, star-filled silence, in a way that echoed the careful stillness they had both learned to value on the planet that had nearly killed them. "They keep asking me the same questions in different ways," he said, settling beside her at the wide viewing window, as if repetition will eventually produce a different answer. "They are trying to understand something they have never had to consider before," Elena said. "It will take time. Do you regret it?" Threll asked after a long pause. "Any of it? What happened to Osmir, to Vantik, everything since?" Elena considered the question seriously, watching the distant stars beyond the reinforced glass, remembering the weight of stone she had placed over Osmir's shallow grave, the uncertain fate that had claimed Vantik somewhere in that vast, unforgiving forest. "I regret that they did not survive," she said quietly. "I will always regret that, but I do not regret what I learned, or what it might mean for anyone else who ends up in a situation like ours. If understanding what happened to us prevents even one future crew from facing the same losses unprepared, then something good came from all of it." The formal reclassification hearing took place 3 weeks later, in a chamber considerably larger and more heavily attended than the initial briefing room had been. Elena stood before the assembled council representatives, flanked by Ashby and Ellison, while Threll sat among the observing delegates, having insisted on being present despite not being required to attend. Solandri, addressing the full assembly, presented the evidence methodically: drone footage, biological analysis, detailed testimony, culminating in the official display of the 2 recovered Skarn skulls, mounted now on a formal presentation stand at the front of the chamber. "The evidence before this council is unambiguous," Solandri said, his voice carrying clearly through the large space. "Earth-origin humanity has demonstrated capabilities inconsistent with its current threat and capability classification. This committee recommends immediate reclassification, elevating human survival and combat aptitude assessments to match verified Deathworlder adjacent status, pending continued observation and data collection." The vote that followed was not unanimous, several delegates raising cautious objections about drawing broad conclusions from a single incident, however remarkable. But the final result was clear enough: humanity's official classification shifting for the first time since the species had joined the wider interstellar community, a quiet but unmistakable acknowledgement that the world once dismissed as a soft cradle had produced something the galaxy had not fully anticipated. Afterward, standing in the corridor outside the now emptying chamber, Elena found herself unexpectedly surrounded by cadets from her original training cohort, the same classmates who had once ranked her lowest among their group, now regarding her with expressions that mixed genuine curiosity with something that looked distinctly like reassessed respect. "They are saying they want to add your survival methods to the standard curriculum," one of them said, a Vashtak cadet named Ilira Kess, who had barely spoken to Elena during their entire time at the academy, prior to Kesserine 4. "Tracking techniques, threat assessment approaches, all of it. They are welcome to it," Elena said, "though I would remind them that instinct alone did not save me. Careful thought did. That part matters more than any specific technique." Weeks later, once the formal proceedings had finally concluded, and the initial wave of curiosity surrounding her return had begun to settle into something more manageable, Elena found herself back in the Academy's main training hall, standing before a display case recently installed near the entrance. Inside, mounted with quiet dignity rather than boastful display, sat one of the 2 Skarn skulls she had carried off Kesserine 4, a small plaque beside it, listing not a victory or a trophy, but a simple statement of fact regarding the planet's dangers and the price 2 cadets had paid. Cadets passing through the hall paused now, more often than not, to study the display for a long moment before continuing on to their own training sessions, a quiet reminder, standing sentinel over every new class that would follow. The galaxy was full of old assumptions about which species deserved respect and which deserved dismissal, assumptions built on comfortable histories and untested confidence. Elena Voss had not set out to prove anything to anyone when her transport ship went down over Kesserine 4 6 weeks earlier. She had simply refused to stop thinking, refused to stop adapting, refused to let an unforgiving world convince her that survival was beyond her reach. In doing so, she had changed not only her own fate, but the wider galaxy's understanding of exactly what a soft, cradle-world species might still be capable of becoming, when given no other choice but to grow sharper, and to remember instincts far older than any academy classroom had ever bothered to teach. She stood before the display a moment longer, then turned and walked on toward her next training session, carrying with her, quietly and permanently, the knowledge of exactly what she had survived, and exactly what she had proven, not just to the council, not just to her classmates, but to herself.